Hello, my name is Jacco Zwetsloot. Today I am moderating this discussion for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in South Korea. And I'm joined by Dr. Christina Chen. Thank you for joining me today, Christina.
Thank you, Jacco.
And also joining me is Rajoli Siddharth Jayaprakash. Thank you for joining me today, Siddharth.
Thank you, Jacco.
Okay, so same question for both of you, and we'll start with Christina first. How would you characterize the current state of Russia-China relations in 3 keywords, and give me a reason why for each of them?
Okay, so I would characterize the relationship between Russia and China into 3 keywords, and they are alignment, and asymmetry, and strategic. For alignment, the 2 sides are definitely showing a lot of signs of getting closer to each other. So if we look at the political dimension, since 2022, the 2 sides have characterized their relationship as old friends, that their relationship is on an unprecedented high level. So I think those 2 terms definitely talks about how close or getting close the relationship is. And it's not surprising because since 2022, with Russia's invasion in Ukraine, Russia has become greatly dependent on China for a lot of support. And so that is the first keyword, the alignment. Also, when it comes to economic dimensions, we see that the bilateral trade between the 2 sides have increased significantly, with China becoming a crucial market for Russia's fossil fuel. And China also exports significant amount of cars, electronics, and other kinds of products to Russia. So that's the economic dimension. When it comes to security, we definitely see the 2 sides becoming closer because since 2022, they have a lot of joint exercises and patrols. That number has grown significantly in recent time. So I would say the alignment has become closer. The second term is asymmetry. Even though we are seeing politically and economically and security-wise, the 2 sides are becoming closer. That relationship is asymmetric because Russia is much more dependent on China rather than the other way around. Because, as I said, Russia has become dependent on external support, given that it's facing a war, it's still fighting, and it's facing sanctions. So China has become like Russia's lifeline. But when you look at the Chinese side, China definitely needs Russia, but that need is not that significant compared to the other way around. The third term I would use to characterize the relationship, and I think many analysts who have agreed with me, is that it's a relationship that is strategic or pragmatic, to say the least. And I think this is because even though they are showing signs of growing closer, and their recent showing up at the SCO summit and the military parade seems to solidify that relationship. But there's definitely underlying tensions, like structure tensions and history. And the 2 sides are still having some mistrust of each other. So even though right now they are kind of putting aside their differences because they have a common vision, which is they treat the US as the rival and they want to challenge the pre-existing global order. So they're putting aside their differences. However, if conditions change, that difference will surface and I think will cause a change to the relationship.
Okay, Siddharth, how would you characterize the current Russia-China relationship in 3 keywords and give us reasons why?
Partnership with some limits would be the first one. I think strengthening multipolarity would be the second keyword. And the third keyword would be lacks a strategic foundation.
Strategic foundation.
I think there are 3 schools of thought when it comes to understanding the Russia-China-North Korea relations. The first one is obviously that The first school of thought believes that it is a no limits partnership, and a second school of thought believes that it's a partnership with some limits, some restrictions. And the third school of thought believes that it's a gross strategic miscalculation, and that they will eventually find themselves at loggerheads like they did during the Soviet times in 1969, where they clashed off in Daminsky Islands. So in my opinion, I veer closer towards the second school of thought that believes that Russia and China, there are some limits in the no limits partnership. And this is because I find because the relationship is deeply transactional, number one. Number two, it's a marriage of convenience. They have a lot of complementarities in the international system. Both want to challenge the dominance of the West. They believe in the creation of an alternative payment structure. They articulate their visions differently for the global South, and that is the reason why they have actually got together. And this has been triggered particularly because of their mutual contestation with the West. Since Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, this began Russia's partial isolation from the West. So this vacuum was slowly filled in by China, and China entered the strategic discourse of Russia, and China conversely with BRI, and later undermining the United Nations, the arbitration court's decision on the South China Sea, saw Russia-China's perceptions align on a lot of factors. But even though there is an alignment, there is also misalignment. For instance, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, China did not support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And similarly, in the event there is ever a clash between China and Taiwan, it is completely certain that Russia will not sign off on it, because and that is the reason why we can't say that these countries are in a no limits partnership. There are a lot of limits that restrain them. Even though at every sector in the Russian Federation there is China, like in the past, Russia did not allow China to invest extensively in the Arctic because it considered it its national priority. But now, with the absence of Western firms from the Arctic discourse, Chinese firms have overtaken it. For instance, COSCO, which is a Chinese shipping company, operates routes between Shanghai to the Russian Arctic ports via the Northern Sea route. So China has encapsulated, like China is part of every discussion and debate in Russia in a sense. Even if we look at something like the SEO summit or the parade in Tiananmen Square, most people interpret Xi, Putin, and Kim Jong-un standing together as three leaders who want to challenge the world order. But conversely, what I see and what a lot of Russia watchers observe is that this is in a sense reinforcing the idea of multipolarity rather than saying that we are in kind of a global alliance or something like that. But still, there is a lot of issues with the Russia-China relations, particularly because it lacks a structural foundation of most relations. If you look at the US-Canada relations or the US-UK relations or the India-Russia relations, there's a lot of strategic foundations which can help explain explain a bilateral relations. But this is absent in the Russia-China relations, and this may also create problems in the future, because what happens in a scenario where the war in Ukraine ends? What will happen when Western businesses return? What will be the role of China or China's prominence in Russia's calculus?
If I'm understanding correctly, is that there's a real fundamental difference between the Russia-China relationship we see today and the Soviet-Chinese relationship of 50, 60 years ago, when there was some ideological underpinnings. Is that what you're hinting at?
Yes, absolutely. Because during the Soviet period, we saw that there was obviously the element of ideology that played a very big role in determining the Russia-China relations. For instance, and the fact of another element also here is that whenever the leadership changed in the Soviet Union, when the change of guard from Stalin to Khrushchev came, and eventually that led to the relations crumbling. But these Cold War dynamics don't really impact the current Russia-China relations. So in that sense, today's Russia-China relations has nothing to do with the Cold War.
Okay, let me ask you both, since when do you believe that the Russia-China relationship is the way that we're describing now? Is this just something that has come up in the last 5 years or 10 years, or is it even something that's really been building since the end of the Cold War? Siddharth, do you want to kick off that?
Yeah, I think I think the relationship stabilized around the 1990s, but more specifically, the strengthening of the bilateral relations between Russia and China took place in the second decade of the 21st century, when the Russia West and the China West contestations were simultaneously growing. The fastest reflection of this was in the economic sector, that we could see that the trade between Russia and China was progressively increasing. So before the invasion of Ukraine, I believe the trade was around 120 billion. But if you look at the data from 2013 to 2021, the business deals between Russia and China have also increased. As I said, ideationally, both states had complementary views, be it in the economic realm, be it in the political realm. So these were properly reflected between 2014 and 2021, since Russia's annexation of Crimea, and later I think China not heeding to the judgment on the South China Sea. I think these factors really had some kind of alignment in their political understandings. So that is where we see the strengthening of Russia-China relations take place.
Okay, Christina, would you agree with that?
I agree with Siddharth, but I think what's really accelerating the deepening of the tie is 2022.
2022.
So what happened in Ukraine,
Right,
because
the all-out war.
the war really pushed Russia to become closer to China. Initially, China was hesitant in joining when being confronted by the world about China's position. China was initially kind of hesitant, reluctant to express its position.
It's still a little bit fence-sitting on the Ukraine war, isn't it? China hasn't said completely we're in support of what you're doing, nor has it said we condemn what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. But right now, what I want to say is that recently, with the showing up at the SCO and joining hands with the other two authoritarian leaders at the military parade, I think China is picking the side.
Okay, a quick question then. What would be one indicator that you two would be watching in the next year or so to show you whether that relationship is strengthening or fraying, or there's some friction?
I think the first thing I'd look at is how fast the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline project, what the discourse around it is. And additionally, along the same line, I would also like to see how China's the shipping, the Arctic shipping reflects out in the next 2 years as well. Because China remains the only player in the, since 2022, all the foreign firms using the northern sea route in the Arctic, they stopped using it, so now it's only China. So I'm pretty certain that if the war in Ukraine ends next year, it'll be interesting to observe how China transacts with Russia now. So that'll be the biggest takeaway for me next year.
Okay, thank you. And Christina?
I would say the indicators like, rather than the political, but more like, does China comply more with the sanctions imposed on Russia? And when it comes to supporting Russia, for example, the purchase of the fossil fuels, do we see China reducing its supply and purchasing that?
Very good. Okay, thank you both very much.